Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we are not rushing through stories of kings or battles. We are not caught up in noise or commotion. Instead, we are stepping quietly into the kitchens of the Middle Ages. You may imagine yourself resting near a hearth, the soft crackling of firewood filling the air. The stone walls of the kitchen are cool and sturdy, keeping out the wind. The wooden beams above hold iron hooks, where pots and pans hang quietly, waiting to be used. This is not a hurried place. It is a place of rhythm, of patience, of slow fire and steady hands. As you listen, let your body relax. Allow your breathing to match the calm, even movements of those who once stirred clay pots and baked bread in earthen ovens. You do not need to remember everything you hear tonight. You may simply drift along with the gentle pace of history, letting the images form softly in your mind. And if sleep finds you, that is perfectly welcome. Transition into setting. In the Middle Ages, cooking was not done on stoves or with machines. Instead, the heart of every meal was fire, sometimes a large open hearth in a great hall, where cooks worked tirelessly to feed dozens of people. Sometimes a small corner fire in a peasant's hut, where only a simple stew simmered slowly, filling the air with warmth and scent. You can picture the gentle smoke rising, curling toward the beams above, the faint smell of wood and herbs drifting around the room, and the sound of a ladle dipping, lifting, and stirring quietly in the pot. This is where our story begins. As you picture yourself near the fire, let the warmth of the flames settle you. The crackling of wood is steady, not loud, just enough to remind you of the simple heartbeat of the medieval home. The kitchen, in those centuries long ago, was not always a separate room as we think of today. In smaller cottages, the hearth was at the very center of the home. It was where families gathered for warmth in the winter, where light was found on dark evenings, and where every meal began its slow journey. Imagine, if you will, a woman in a woolen dress, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She leans over the pot with patience, stirring with a long wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. She is not rushing. She is not distracted. Cooking is a rhythm, a steady task, carried out as much by memory as by sight. Beside her, a child may be kneeling near the fire, blowing softly onto kindling, helping the flames keep their gentle glow. The faint scent of smoke clings to the air, weaving its way into every fabric and wall of the cottage. If you listen closely, you may almost hear the quiet bubbling of the stew, a mixture of barley, peas, and whatever vegetables were available from the garden, perhaps a bit of onion or leek, perhaps some cabbage leaves, and if fortune was kind that week, maybe a small piece of salted pork dropped in for flavor. The peasant's meal was humble, but it was filling, and in the calm of the evening, the family gathered close, their bowls filled with the same simple food, their hearts warmed by the same fire. Now, if you let your imagination wander, you may step into another kind of kitchen, one far larger, far busier, yet still filled with the same firelight and smoke. This is the kitchen of a noble household. Here, the hearth is grand, with iron racks for roasting meat, great hooks for heavy kettles, and long spits turning slowly before the flames. The air is alive with many scents: roasted fowl, fresh bread, herbs crushed in mortar and pestle. But even here, the mood is steady. The cooks move with quiet skill, their tasks well practiced. One lays out fish on wooden boards, sprinkling it with parsley. Another tends to the bread ovens, pulling out loaves baked golden and warm. A boy carries pitchers of water, while a woman carefully arranges cheese and fruit upon a tray. Even in such a place of activity, the sound is not frantic. It is more like a soft harmony, each task blending into the other. Like a quiet song of daily life, carried on the smoke of the hearth. In both cottages and castles, the tools were simple: pots of clay and iron, knives of iron, handles worn smooth, wooden spoons, ladles, and bowls, flat stones sometimes used as surfaces for cooking bread, and every tool, every vessel, carried with it the mark of many meals before. There is something deeply comforting about this, the thought that food, prepared slowly, with fire and patience, left behind traces of warmth and memory in every object it touched. As you rest now, Let yourself picture these things clearly, not as sharp images, but as soft scenes, gently painted in your imagination. The glow of a fire on stone, the curve of a clay pot, the sound of a spoon scraping softly along the bottom of a kettle, the faint scent of herbs, thyme perhaps, or sage, drifting lazily through the air. Cooking in the Middle Ages was not only about feeding the body, it was also about keeping time. The rising of bread, the boiling of broth, the turning of a spit, each was a measure of hours, of patience, of waiting. In a world without clocks in every corner, the kitchen itself became a quiet keeper of time, a pot left to simmer for the length of a prayer, a loaf baked until the shadows shifted on the wall. Meals became the rhythm of the day, morning bread, midday stew, evening porridge. And so, in every home, the kitchen was not only a place of fire and food, but also a place of peace, where life slowed to the natural pace of boiling water, of rising dough, of embers glowing low. If you close your eyes, you may imagine sitting there now, the firelight flickering gently, the voices of family or servants speaking softly in the background, a dog curled up near the hearth, sleeping as the warmth touches its fur, and the comfort of knowing that soon a meal will be placed before you, simple, warm, and enough. Allow this picture to hold you as you relax deeper, letting your breath grow slower, like the steady rhythm of the medieval kitchen itself. The kitchen fire still burns softly in our imagination, its glow steady, its warmth inviting. But now, let us think about what people placed into those pots and onto those pans. For the story of medieval cooking is also the story of what was grown, gathered, traded, and preserved. In the humblest cottages, food was drawn directly from the land nearby. A small garden outside the door grew hardy vegetables, onions, leeks, cabbages, peas, beans. These were plants that could withstand the changing seasons of the medieval year. The soil, tended by hand, gave forth enough to fill the pot each day, and when summer was kind, herbs, such as thyme, sage, and parsley grew in corners, ready to be plucked and sprinkled into stews. Bread was another constant. Not always the soft white loaves of modern times, but darker, heavier bread made from rye, barley, or oats. Its crust was thick, its flavor strong, and it filled the stomach well. If grain was scarce, families would stretch their bread with beans, peas, or chestnut flour. Each loaf told a quiet story of the harvest, the weather, and the patience of hands that ground the grain. Meat was rarer for peasants. A small chicken, perhaps, or a rabbit caught in the fields. Sometimes, pork from a pig raised carefully over the year, preserved with salt to last through the winter. But more often, meals were built from grains and vegetables. This was not sadness, but rhythm. People ate what was near, what was possible, what the land itself allowed. Cheese was common, made from the milk of goats or cows, pressed and aged in simple wooden forms. It was a food that lasted, one that traveled well, and one that could turn humble bread into a satisfying meal. Eggs, fresh in spring and summer, were treasures gathered from hens, kept carefully, and eaten with gratitude. Now, if we walk in thought from the cottage to the manor or castle, the ingredients change. For nobles had access to more variety, more richness, more color in their meals. There might be roasted venison from the hunt, swan or peacock prepared not just for eating, but for show. Their feathers sometimes placed back upon the bird once cooked, creating a spectacle at the feast. There might be roasted venison from the hunt, swan or peacock prepared not just for eating, but for show. Their feathers sometimes placed back upon the bird once cooked, creating a spectacle at the feast. Fish brought from rivers or the sea, sometimes salted, sometimes fresh, depending on how near the waters lay. Spices, cinnamon, pepper, cloves, and saffron arrived by trade, carried across long, uncertain roads from the east. They were precious, measured carefully, often locked in chests and dispensed with ceremony. The use of these spices was not just for taste, but also for display. To season a dish with saffron, turning it golden, was a sign of wealth and connection to faraway lands. And yet, even here, among luxury, the meals still began with fire, pot, and patience. The rhythm of cooking remained the same. Fruits, too, were part of the medieval table. Apples stored through the winter, pears ripening in the autumn air, berries gathered in summer hedgerows, dried fruits, figs, dates, raisins came by trade. Sweet treasures that flavored both meat dishes and puddings. Honey was the common sweetener. Sugar, when it arrived, was rare and costly. So the hum of bees in summer meadows was not only music but also promise of sweetness to come. Sealed in combs of gold, preservation was a necessity. Salting, smoking, drying, and pickling turned the bounty of one season into the survival of another. Fish hung from beams in smokehouses, meat salted in barrels, cabbages transformed into tangy sauerkraut. These methods carried life through the lean months, when fields lay bare and snow covered the earth. Imagine the comfort of opening such a barrel in January. The scent of smoked meat, strong and sustaining, filling the air of the cold kitchen. It was not luxury, but it was enough, and enough was all that was needed. The ingredients of the Middle Ages may sound simple by today's measure, but in their simplicity, they carried meaning. Every onion pulled from the earth, every loaf of bread risen, every egg gathered from the straw was part of a larger pattern, a pattern of living closely with the land, listening to its seasons, and accepting its gifts with patience. As you breathe slowly now, you may imagine these foods before you. A loaf of dark rye bread on a wooden board, a wedge of cheese beside it, pale and firm, a small clay pot filled with peas and barley, gently simmered with a hint of onion, and perhaps, if fortune is kind in this moment of imagination, a spoonful of honey, golden and smooth. These are not foods of indulgence. They are foods of comfort, foods of steadiness. The kind of meals that do not demand attention, but simply nourish quietly, like the fire that warms the room. And so, whether in a peasant's cottage or a noble's hall, food was more than sustenance. It was a reflection of place, of time, of patience. It was a gentle rhythm in a world that moved more slowly, more softly than our own. Allow yourself to rest within that rhythm now. The bubbling pot, the rising bread, the smoke curling upward from the fire, all steady, all calm, all part of the flow of life in the Middle Ages. Let us imagine now that the quiet cottage meal has passed, and the scene shifts slowly, like a lantern flame moving through a hall. We find ourselves at a gathering, not noisy or overwhelming, but steady, glowing, filled with the slower rhythm of medieval celebration. Feasts were moments when time seemed to pause. For most days of the year, meals were humble and repetitive. But when a wedding, a holy day, or a harvest festival arrived, food took on a new role. It became not only nourishment, but also a language of gratitude, display, and community. The great hall of a castle, warmed by torches and a central hearth, stretched long and high. Wooden tables lined the room, laid not with delicate porcelain, but with trenchers, thick slices of bread used as plates. Upon these trenchers, foods were placed, meats carved, pies opened, stews ladled, and when the meal ended, the soaked bread itself was eaten, or given to the poor waiting outside. The walls echoed with a quieter kind of life, not the sharp noise of modern celebration, but the deep hum of voices, the gentle strum of a lute, the far-off toll of church bells marking time. Roasted meats were the centerpiece of noble feasts, venison from the hunt, boar with crisp skin, chickens and geese, spiced and basted. Fish, too, when the church calendar demanded days of fasting, and often these dishes were not only food, but pageantry. A roasted swan, its feathers reattached, placed proudly on the table. A pie that, when cut open, released small birds into the hall, fluttering upward in surprise. Such spectacles were not everyday food, but symbols, moments of wonder designed to impress. Yet even these, in the soft telling of history, become gentle images. The crackling fire, the golden skin of roasted meat glistening in candlelight, the soft rustle of feathers arranged carefully by hand, all slowed, all softened, like distant echoes of a world long past. Drinks flowed differently in the Middle Ages than today. Ale was the common drink of many, brewed at home, often cloudy and warm. Wine was more rare, though in noble houses it was poured, sometimes spiced with cinnamon or cloves. Mead, sweet from honey, was shared in some regions, carrying with it the taste of summer flowers captured in liquid form. The clink of cups was not loud or jarring, but steady, hands raising, voices toasting, all part of the shared rhythm of the feast. If we step away now from the feasting halls, we find ourselves in a quieter space, a kitchen, warmed by the steady glow of the hearth, filled with the fragrance of food in its earliest stages. In the Middle Ages, kitchens were not as we know them today. There were no bright tiles, no metal stoves, no cupboards neatly stacked. Instead, the kitchen was centered around a single force, the fire. The hearth was both heart and tool. Its flames licked the base of iron cauldrons. Its embers glowed under spits that slowly turned. The fire's crackle was constant, its warmth steady. And into this warmth, cooks placed pots, pans, and kettles of every size. Iron was precious, yet essential. Large cauldrons hung from hooks over the fire, where stews simmered for hours. Flat pans, with long handles to keep hands from burning, held cakes and fritters. Knives were simple but sharp, carved by blacksmiths to chop vegetables, sliced meats, and carve bread. Wooden spoons stirred, patiently and slowly. Ladles dipped into broths, and clay jugs and bowls held liquids, cool against the heat. For bread, ovens were a separate part of life. Most villages did not own ovens, for they were costly and required much fuel. Instead, bread was taken to communal ovens, where families gathered, each leaving their dough to bake in turn. The smell of fresh bread rising would drift through the village, soft and comforting, a signal of daily life continuing as it always had. Inside noble kitchens, ovens were larger, carved into stone walls, glowing with embers that warmed the space. But still, the process was slow. Dough shaped by hand, flour dusted across wooden boards, loaves placed carefully into the heat, to emerge crusted and golden. Water was carried in from wells, poured into pitchers, sometimes warmed in kettles to mix with grains or soften dough. Herbs were gathered and laid on shelves to dry. Their scents, lingering thyme, rosemary, sage, mint, salt was precious, often stored carefully in small, carved boxes. And when it was sprinkled over food, it was not only flavor, but preservation. The sounds of a medieval kitchen were never sharp or hurried. They were slow and steady, almost musical in their rhythm. The scrape of a knife against a wooden board, the bubbling of a pot over fire, the rustle of herbs tied with twine, the soft thud of dough pressed and folded again and again. Each sound was part of the same gentle rhythm, a rhythm that matched the rise and fall of breath, a rhythm that could lull a weary soul into rest. Cooks and castles worked hard, but their world was filled with the same sensory details as peasants. The glow of firelight, the shimmer of oil in a pan, the faint sweetness of honey melting into warm porridge, the slow roasting of meat, its fragrance filling the hall. Even the grandest feast began humbly here, in the kitchen's steady warmth, with hands guiding tools that had changed little through the centuries, and if you close your eyes, you might imagine yourself standing near that hearth. The heat brushing your skin, the scent of bread and herbs rising around you, the soft clink of pottery, the golden glow of firelight flickering across the stone walls. It is not noisy, not overwhelming. It is calm, timeless, and steady, a place where every movement, stirring, chopping, kneading, pouring, becomes part of a lullaby for the senses. And just as food was cooked slowly over fire, so too may your thoughts now simmer down, growing softer, slower, calmer, until they, too, rest like embers glowing in the quiet. In the Middle Ages, what people ate was shaped by who they were, and yet, whether simple or rich, every meal was touched by the same slow rhythm of fire, bread, and thyme. For the peasant, food was plain, but filling. The day might begin with coarse bread, dipped into a bowl of ale or milk. Sometimes porridge was cooked from oats, barley, or rye, warmed in a small pot over the hearth. The flavor was simple, soft, earthy, sometimes sweetened with honey when it was available. Vegetables were common: cabbages, leeks, onions, peas, and beans. These were grown in small garden plots, tended carefully and harvested by hand. They simmered in stews, bubbling slowly with grains, perhaps with a scrap of bacon or a bone to flavor the broth. The taste was humble, but it was steady, nourishing, and the scent of such a meal was gentle, comforting like warmth on a cool day, or the smell of soil after rain. Nobles, by contrast, ate with more variety. Their meals began with many small dishes, bread served with butter or cheese, meat roasted on spits, fish seasoned with herbs, sauces thickened with ground almonds or spiced wine. For those who could afford it, spices traveled from faraway lands: cinnamon, pepper, saffron. These were treasures, measured carefully, their fragrances carrying hints of distant markets. Still, though richer in flavor, noble meals were also slow in rhythm. Each dish took hours to prepare: roasting, boiling, layering. Servants carried platters into great halls, where long tables were lined with food. But the heart of the meal remained the same: fire, bread, and patience. Peasants often ate from wooden bowls, using wooden spoons. Nobles ate from pewter or silver dishes, though fingers were still common tools. Bread, in both households, was central, torn by hand, dipped into broth, used as a vessel for meat or cheese. In humble cottages, bread might be dark and coarse, while in noble halls it was whiter, sifted, and softer. Yet both loaves, when broken, carried the same warmth, the same comfort, the same reminder that food was life itself. At midday, peasants gathered to share what they had. The children dipping crusts into stew, the family warming themselves near the fire. Nobles too sat together, though with greater ceremony. Platters laid out, musicians sometimes playing softly in the background, candles flickering along the hall. In both places, silence was often observed at the beginning of meals. A quiet prayer of thanks, murmured in Latin or in simple words, before hands reached for bread, before spoons dipped into broth. As the day ended, the final meal was small and light, perhaps more bread, perhaps cheese, perhaps only a bowl of broth. Fires burned low, embers glowed, and the last warmth of the day drifted through the home.